Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 298th episode, our guest is Paige Towers. Paige Towers is the author of The Sound of Undoing, a memoir and essays. Her writing has appeared in The Washington Post, The Guardian, McSweeney's, and Harvard Review. Originally from Iowa, Towers now lives along the Washington coast. Her new book, What They Stole, a familicide rooted in intercountry adoption, was published May 26th by Iowa University Press.
I'm Paige Towers. I'm a nonfiction writer, and my second book is coming out May 26th. It's called What They Stole, and it is about the history of intercountry adoption from Korea, told through the story of a tragic familicide that happened in my hometown of Iowa City. But I have been a freelancer. I'm kind of like a self-taught journalist, but I have an MFA in nonfiction writing from Emerson College. As I said, I'm originally from Iowa City. Now I live on the northwest coast of Washington with my family. And and I'm writing, and that's me.
That's great. Yeah, well, I was going to ask how you got interested in this case, but I guess if it's your hometown, you probably had somewhat of a connection to this case just from growing up there, right?
Yeah, Iowa City is like a fairly small community, is a close-knit community, and so this was a pretty prominent family. The husband, the father, Stephen Supple, was like the local bank vice president. So it was massive when it happened. But so this event, this murder-suicide or familicide happened in 2008, but it wasn't actually until like 2018, 10 years later, that it hit me that I'd never like Googled it. I'd never looked back on it. I was very invested in it when it first happened, but looking back, all these other sort of things started popping up on the history of Korean adoption and some of the social and political issues surrounding it. And so, yeah, pretty immediately, I just like got very invested in a new way.
Right. I wasn't familiar with this case before I started reading your book, and I purposely didn't Google much about it just so I would be surprised as you unfolded the story.
Right.
I do that a lot with like documentaries and stuff. Like I purposely don't like go to the Wikipedia or anything, even though it's probably like public information. I'm just like I just like being surprised along with everyone else, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I love that for sure.
But for people that don't know that case, can you go into a little bit more about their background and kind of the series of tragic events that kind of occurred here?
Yes. So Stephen Supple, as I said, was a bank vice president. He was married to a woman named Cheryl, and they lived in Iowa City, in a very nice suburb of Iowa City, in a big house. And they wanted to adopt instead of have biological children, and they adopted in their first child in 1998 through what was then the largest adoption agency in the world, Holt International, and they adopted this first child from South Korea. And then they adopted 3 more times, again from Korea through Holt. And so they had 4 young adopted children. And and you're obviously like, what happened? This was like a very quintessential, like all-American family. And what happened was that as a big shock to the community, Steve was charged with embezzlement and money laundering. He was accused of stealing over $500,000. And in retrospect, it's clear that his mental health deteriorated. unbeknownst to a lot of people. And eventually, in March 2008, he murdered his wife and their four adopted children.
Yeah, that's such a terrible event, and it does open up this whole other narrative that you unfold about the larger history of especially Korean adoption. I guess I didn't know anything about the background of it, and it kind
Mhm.
of came in the wake of the Korean War, right? That was kind of the impetus for this agency, this whole agency that you go into. Can you talk a little bit about the history of that agency, the one that provided them with these children?
Yes. So, okay, Korean War, which is um, not often talked about, and
No,
especially in
not
terms
that
of like,
much.
yeah, like in context of World War II and Vietnam, and it's wedged in there. But I feel like a lot of Americans have lost a lot of details of that history. But this is 1950 is when the U.S. steps in to fight alongside South Korea, and they're fighting North Korea with the support of China and the Soviet Union. This war lasts 3 years, and the peninsula is completely devastated, right? So there are thousands and thousands of displaced, abandoned, orphan children. Um, and so it's kind of easy to like start this history with this couple, Harry and Bertha Holt, who eventually start the Holt adoption program, which became Holt International. The truth is, there's a lot more there, and I've written about it in the book, and other scholars and journalists have read about it a lot. But the U.S. military is there. Um, a lot of GIs are fathering children with Korean women. Um, it's also kind of this like new American soldier acting as a humanitarian. So they're building orphanages, and they are donating food and gifts sent from home, and all of this is like very uh very massively covered by the US media. um and so there's already sort of this big interest in Korean children. um and so adoptions start very slowly post-war, going through like more standardized experience agencies that are taking children who are in orphanages and adopting them to families in the US who have been screened by social workers. But what happens is that this couple, Harry and Bertha Holt, they they see like a presentation by a Christian missionary. This missionary, he comes to Eugene, Oregon. They live near Eugene, and he's trying to raise money to send to Korea to support the children in their orphanages. And the Holts are deeply conservative, uh, deeply conservative evangelicals. And what happens is that they really latch onto this story. They start by sponsoring children, but they feel that is not enough. Their church really encourages them to take more action. And what happens is that eventually Harry Holt, who is not, let me slow down. Sorry. Harry Holt goes to Korea in 1955, and he essentially collects eight children.
That was a wild tale. Like he's just going through the country, just picking up children left and right. I mean,
Right.
I said I have five children, but that was over the course of 10 years. And I can't
Yes.
imagine collecting eight in one go. Like that's wild.
Yeah. Eight children, all under three,
Whew.
traumatized
Right.
and physically very frail. They have six biological children at home.
Unbelievable.
Um, and it's my book goes into all of this, but there's this whole kind of legislative act that happens, that they're able to do this. but then the whole thing is that like when Harry comes home with these children, there is this huge media storm, and it's printed in like every newspaper across the country, and very quickly people are calling the Holts and asking, how do I adopt a Korean child? And they are inspired and start an agency within months. But like an important thing I left out is that Harry and Bertha Holt, they didn't have experience in child welfare. Harry had an 8th grade education because he quit school to help on the family farm, and he became like a very wealthy businessman in Oregon through logging and through the Depression era, and they farmed, they ran Bible study, all these things, but they did not have any experience in adoption and child welfare. They were very anti-government, very anti-regulation and all. So this is the family that's stepping in and like taking the reins on adoption in Korea.
Hmm. Yeah. And how many Korean children are they responsible for, this agency? Like, it's got to be thousands, right?
Are we talking like right when it started in the mid 50s?
Oh, sure,
Uh,
that or just overall or whatever. Yeah, just
oh, yeah. So, I mean, overall, since adoption began out of Korea, intercountry adoption began out of Korea in like 1953 to now, it's estimated that about 200,000 children have been sent overseas for
wow.
adoption. Probably about like 115,000 of those to the US. And it's hard. It's hard getting exact numbers because the numbers are recorded by the private agencies themselves,
Right.
and so I don't have exact numbers,
Hmm.
but Holt was responsible for the majority of those adoptions. Yes.
And what kind of uh screening process? Because I mean, I assume that it was less than other ways that you could adopt. Is that right? Like you don't have to go through as many hoops or have a home visit or whatever, or do you? I don't know. Was there requirements?
Right. So, um, yes. So in the 1950s, when they were first starting out, they're very, very anti-establishment, and they rejected uh, any legal advice. They rejected help and support from the state, and they rejected the norms of adoption at the time, which was that adoptive parent applicants were screened by social workers. They went through interviews, they went through home visits, right? And so, as documented in my book, they did not they forgo all all background checks, all screenings, all social worker interviews and home visits. And instead, their application was just a very basic note card, asking, like, you know, names, address, race, birth date. And the biggest thing, as the Holts themselves documented over and over, was that they wanted families who were born again Christians. So, Methodists, Lutherans, Catholics were not allowed to adopt. Um, and uh, and so with that, you can imagine a huge amount of recklessness happening. Families also weren't financially screened, and so this is happening in the at the the infancy of this agency,
Hmm.
and then things start to professionalize, right? But so by the mid 60s, late 60s, you have a more professional standard agency that's employing social workers and doing interviews and doing background checks. But as I've documented, the more and more that this industry grew, it became a huge money making venture with very little regulation by either the U.S. or by Korea, and so once again, a lot of corners were cut. There were a lot of um, ethically uh, ambiguous decisions made at best. And so, yeah, it's uh, yeah. So it started off. It started off as this extremely casual, private, family-run agency, but yeah, so it shifted into this like massive money-making endeavor by the 80s, and both agencies had major issues.
And I remember reading that in your book that the term orphan changed over time, whereas initially it meant both parents were dead, but it eventually became one parent is dead and the other signed off rights, and then maybe it's questionable how much the person's consenting to giving up those rights. Can you talk a little bit about some of those changes? Because I think that's important.
Yes. So originally, yes, that term orphan meant that both parents were deceased, and that shifted in just the most minute little one sentence way in an 1853 act, and suddenly, yes, it began. Or the definition of an orphan was suddenly that it could be one parent signing away their parental rights, giving their consent for adoption. And so this opened up this whole new era of what consent means with adoption. It opened up an era of mass coercion. You have if women in Korea, especially if we're talking about 1950s, women who have no money, no support. And if they're a single mother, especially if they're a single mother of a child fathered by a Western soldier, then they're facing horrible social stigma. There just really were no options. And so when a paper is thrust in front of you to sign, yeah, it suddenly opened up this whole thing of what an ethical adoption looks like. But on the other hand, in the US, people adopting children from overseas often didn't understand any of this. They weren't given this context in the media. They weren't, for the most part, weren't aware that the child that they were adopting was not, in fact, an orphan, or very, very likely not an orphan. And so it just, yeah, it created this whole confusion that I think still exists today. There's definitely kind of this idea, this pro-adoption idea, that there are hundreds of thousands or even millions of orphans out there waiting for a family, when in reality it's much, much more complicated than that.
Is there anything in the process of this family that you focus on? Is it Sopel?
Oh,
Oh, you said
Supel.
Supel, sorry.
Yeah.
Um, the Supel family, is there anything, I mean, obviously, after all this came out, that's another issue, but before, when they were first starting to adopt, is there any lapses that could have caught these people and not allowed them to go through with this, or did they just slip under the radar because they hadn't raised any flags yet, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it's an answer I built to slowly in the book.
Oh, I don't mean to give away your whole book.
And
Sorry.
oh no,
I haven't finished it
no,
yet. I'm like halfway through, so I'm
no, no, great. No, that's totally fine. Let's talk about it. Like it, I try
Tell me the
to,
ending of your book so no one
let
has
me
to
tell
buy
you,
it, please.
let,
No, I'm kidding.
yeah, like, no, it's like, I try to lay it out with, so, okay, as a journalist, as a researcher, like adoption is a really hard thing to study, because records, all of this is, it's so concealed. Legally, I can't access private records, and agencies don't release any information about families or really much of anything. So I had to step really carefully. But the argument I make on a mass scale is to show what, as much as I can, about what Holt International was doing at that time that they were adopting, so late 90s and early 2000s. And even then, over 50 years since the Korean War, uh, there are investigations that show that they still were not investigating adoptive families as thoroughly as expected, that there wasn't enough of a like financial background check, or enough of high enough financial standards. And so I lay those, there's other things, but I lay those out in terms of what Holt was doing at that time. I think as on another more personal note, you could argue that sending 4 young children without, I'm like being careful, so being careful, because I don't have all the information, but we could say that like sending 4 young children back to back to back, with the cost of adoptions being so extremely high as they were by that time. So the Supples are easily spending $10,000 per child. It could be significantly, much more, once all of the legal fees and the airfare and everything is completed. And so, was there enough of an investigation between each child to make sure that instead of, okay, here's 2 children, but what's happening between child number 3, child number 4, especially as 2 of those children have special needs, which of course raises the costs of what the Supples are paying. So it's hard to say. It's hard to, my goal isn't to condemn any individual family. Adoption can be this loving and beautiful thing for a lot of families, for a lot of adopted people, but in their own words. My interrogation is more of the system itself. And by the end of the book, really, I've tried to build this argument that the system was broken from the beginning. The system was unnecessary, and it was what's the word I'm looking for? It took advantage. It took advantage of a country destroyed by war, partly destroyed by U.S. bombs and artillery fire and everything. And it took advantage of a situation, and instead of stepping in and helping women keep their children, helping keep families together with financial support, instead people were sending their money to receive a child in return. So, and then that system kept growing and growing and growing. And so my interrogation is of that system itself. Right. And so whether they could have like caught this, the fact that Stephen Supple was not the man that they thought he was, is really hard to say. And I think my argument would be more that like they shouldn't have had to anyway. because there were other solutions.
Sure. Well, the reason I bring that up is that later in your book, you touch on something that I've done some reporting on for several years, is the Jonestown Massacre. I've interviewed several survivors, including on this podcast. But so you mentioned his Jim Jones's 21-year-old son, Lou Eric, who died in that massacre. And you want to go back to, what could have been done to prevent this. When he adopted these children, this rainbow family that he did, he was a model citizen. He was like a community leader. He was the first. I'm in Indiana. He was the first mixed race. He adopted a black child, which was the first time that had happened in the state of Indiana. And he was an upstanding reverend and community leader at the time. So who would have thought, that would have happened later on? So it's like, you can't. I don't know. It seems very difficult to screen for that kind of thing, I guess, without previous, red flags to point to, I guess. But
I completely agree with you. I think if we're looking back at 1953, even, the maximum number of children that Americans were allowed to adopt was 2. And it wasn't some arbitrary number. It was what child welfare workers, what social workers found was the number of children that an adoptive couple could support, could handle any challenges that arose, could handle financially. And so that would be one thing that I would point to systematically, was this, what you just touched on, this kind of 1960s, 70s trend of the quote unquote rainbow family, which again, parents are collecting.
Collect them all. Got one of each.
It's you're literally building this family of different races, which is questionable.
Right.
But so systematically, even if we say it's Jim Jones, right? Yes.
Right.
Let's, like, he's outstanding. Like he's passed his interviews with flying colors. I would still say there should have been systematic regulations in place.
Yes. Well, and once again, it was the number, right? I mean, he did these like boom, 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 boom. Like he all of a sudden he has half a dozen kids. You know what I mean?
Yes, and in this very kind of obsessive way.
Oh, yeah.
You almost become a bit almost like addicted to this idea of adoption. Yes,
you're hoarding the children. Right. But yeah, well, what less? What going forward? Because I mean, we've touched on a lot of the things that can go wrong and been problems with the system, but I have family members that are adopted and it's worked out well for them. And I know I have friends who have been adopted and it's worked out well for them. Obviously it doesn't always work out well, but it can be a good experience and a good, a good path for someone to go down if they're called to do that. So, I definitely don't want to paint every adoption story with the same brush, but there's obviously massive problems. What kind of changes or reforms could be made to the system or have been made?
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, again, like what you've just said, so many adoptive parents have acted with genuine love and good intentions. And I think it's possible to acknowledge the love that many adoptive families feel while also examining the historical systems that made adoption possible. So, we're doing two things at once, because understanding this history helps ensure that adoption practices are ethical and transparent today and the future. So first of all, I guess if you were to ask me, like, what does a radical reckoning with intercountry adoption look like? I would say first, which is kind of what I tried to do with this book, is to reframe history adoption is policy, not charity, not rescue. It's not an accidental byproduct of tragedy. It was this was a system that was built and legalized. And then I would say beyond that, we have to center the people historically who have been silenced, which I don't know if you've seen what Korea is doing now with their Truth and Reconciliation Committee. But
I mean, I know the concept because I think I heard of that in the context of
South Africa?
South Africa, right after
Right.
apartheid.
Right. So they've launched their own committee to
Also,
look.
Colombia had something similar after their civil war.
Oh, that right. Okay, great. Yeah.
Anyway, go
So
on.
no, they launched this committee to look back at some of the atrocities that occurred in the 1980s, when there was an authoritarian government in charge, putting a lot of Korean people in detention camps. Pretty horrific, violent era for Korea. What was left off the list, though, of looking back and trying to make atonement and trying to document history was the history of adoption. And so adopted people from Korea came together and took action and ensured that this committee also looked at intercountry adoption. And there's been a lot of, like, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of like false starts and unclear where it's going. But I think it was just like yesterday, April 27th, that the president of South Korea went on stage and apologized for the state's actions in Korea and some of the atrocities and unjustness that happened. So there are, like, things are shifting. But I would say that a lot of this responsibility right now is falling on South Korea. It's falling on the sending country to do all of this work of digging up old records and trying to hold agencies accountable and trying to hold politicians accountable. And we're really not doing that in the US. We're not really doing that in Europe, where a lot of Korean children were sent as well. We also, I could talk forever, but there's also this issue of US citizenship that I think a lot more people are aware of now. It's made more like mainstream media recently. But up until 2000, when children were sent overseas for adoption into a US family, they were not automatically given US citizenship. And so somebody, a child who's lost their family and their home country, land in the US, maybe they're 6 months old, and they grow up and they find out that their parents never applied for their citizenship, and a lot of times their parents didn't know. They simply thought that through the adoption paperwork that their child became a citizen or some other situation, or like trying to navigate the immigration system in this country. People gave up or people put it off or whatever happened. But then you have adopted people growing up in America, and then when they go to apply for a college loan or for a job or a passport, they find out that they're not a citizen. And so in 2000, there was a legal act that, everyone since then who's come into the country as an adopted person has been given citizenship automatically. But Republicans blocked bills to provide this retroactive citizenship to children who came before. So that's probably a pretty good place to start in terms of like, how do we amend? Is that, there are still thousands and thousands of adopted people, many of them from Korea, who are living in this country without citizenship. And I don't have a number because it's not well documented, but hundreds of them have been deported. Hundreds of adopted people have been deported back to their countries of birth.
Right. Well, I appreciate in your writing that, I know that you probably ran into so many places where the walls just went up and you couldn't find any more information about for whatever reason. So I can see the outlines of your research, where you have to fill in the gaps there. So it's definitely on the page, in terms of like, well, we can know this, but we can't know this, because
Right.
it's sealed or it's lost to history or time. So
yes, yeah.
So there's a lot of that with the subjects. So
yes, for sure, a lot of concealed records, and just like a shout out to all of the adoptee activists out there who are like working really hard to uncover records and to change laws that regulate them, and to just essentially kind of like open up the doors and windows a little bit. But yes, as a researcher, there are places in the book where it's like, this is impossible to know, but here's the context of what's happening. And fortunately, I was like able to find enough details, context, and through it, talking to people to kind of like push towards the truth,
Right. And a lot of these things were being covered up because just horrendous things were happening. I mean, by today's standards would never occur. I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Three Identical Strangers. Have you ever seen that?
No, I've heard of that though.
Oh, you should watch it. It's not a feel-good movie, but I think given the subject of your book, I think you'd find it interesting. So,
all right, writing it down now. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to go through all this. I definitely, it's a page turner. I'm reading it. I plan on finishing it. So,
oh, that's so kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's been a good read. But the one question I do ask here at the end though is, what music have you been listening to lately?
Oh, what music? Okay, so I have a 4-year-old child, and you also have children, so you know that they can start to affect your music decisions, like 100%. When you're So, the person who would be normally, I was listening to like Geese, and then like a Fleetwood Mac song, and then Tame Impala would come on, and now I'm listening to Bad Bunny for some reason. Like that's what, like in the morning before preschool, like he really wants to jam out to that.
Nice.
So yeah, it's just like pushing my musical sensibilities, I guess. Yep. Like, yeah,
absolutely. Now my 8-year-old daughter Emerald is the world's biggest Taylor Swift fan, and she has slowly, one by one, converted all of us through sheer repetition.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I have not been converted yet, but good for her. Good for you.
Well, you know what? She'll make you a mix. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. By tomorrow, I'll be a fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Cool.
Great.
Thank you so much for having me. I really
you're welcome back anytime. There's definitely more to talk about. So
great. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay, you too.